Now recently Samsung updated their tablet lineup with the new S10 series. We've been testing out the new S10 Ultra for the past few weeks, but what I want to do is specifically compare it against the most powerful tablet that you can get right now, the iPad Pro with the M4 chip. We're going to take a look at the design differences, talk about the displays as well as the internal performance, AI capabilities, as well as battery life. Then we're going to weigh out the advantages that each tablet presents to determine which one is more capable, which one has better overall value, and ultimately the better tablet. So let's get into it. Okay, so the first thing I want to talk about is the price point. Now the iPad Pro with the M4 chip starts at $1299 for the 13-inch model. On the Samsung Galaxy Tab S10 Ultra, you're looking at $1199 for the tablet itself, but it actually comes with the S Pen included with the tablet, which is nice. That's an $80 to $130 option on the Apple side if you want to get the Apple Pencil or Pencil Pro respectively. Keyboard-wise, they're around the same price. You can get a slim keyboard on the Samsung side, which we have right here for about $200, and a keyboard with a trackpad is about $350, the same as the Magic Keyboard on the Apple side. Now in terms of the design, you can see that the iPad utilizes a 4:3 aspect ratio. The screen measures about 13 inches exactly diagonally. On the S10 Ultra, you're looking at a 14.6 inch diagonal size, so a larger overall screen. It's also 16 by 10 aspect ratio, making it perfect for content consumption, especially for videos where you don't have the large bars at the top and bottom like you do on the iPad. Now, the size is actually quite different on both of them. Obviously, they're using a different shape, but the footprint is overall smaller and more compact on the iPad side. And in addition to that, it's also thinner and lighter. It measures around 5.1 millimeters in terms of thickness, weighing about 579 grams for this Wi-Fi version. And on the Samsung side, you're looking at about 718 grams in weight and about 5.4 millimeters in terms of thickness. Now, in terms of the displays themselves, both are using OLED panels that can refresh up to 120 hertz. So they're very smooth in terms of reaction time and overall responsiveness. The resolution is different, including the PPI count. Because we're using a larger overall display, the overall pixel density is slightly less on the Samsung. It has a PPI count of about 239 versus around 264 on the iPad side. So the iPad has a little bit better pixel density, a little bit sharper overall images and videos. And I do find that the colors and overall saturation levels are a little bit more true to life and less saturated and kind of hyper exposed like what we sometimes encounter with Samsung processing. But probably the biggest difference between these two in terms of display is the overall brightness that you get on the XDR panel on the iPad side. You're getting at least double the brightness in both regular display mode and in HDR mode, which is about 1,000 to 1,600 nits respectively. So in terms of viewing angles, dynamic contrast ratio, as well as versatility in outdoor conditions, the iPad definitely has an edge up over here. Now in terms of the ports and connectivity options, on the Samsung side you have one USB-C connection that's 3.2 Gen 1, and it can transfer data up to 5 gigabits a second. There's also a fingerprint scanner in addition to having a expandable micro SD expansion slot, which is always nice if you want to expand the memory of the internal storage, which is not available on the iPad. But what the iPad has is a USB 4/Thunderbolt connection that has data throughput rates of up to 40 gigabits a second, meaning really fast data transferring speed through an SSD or hooking up an external 6K display at 60 Hz refresh rate. And speaking of hooking up an external display, you can actually do so wirelessly with the Samsung Dex interface built into the Samsung S10 Ultra tablet. This has been around for many years, and Dex is basically a desktop interface using the Android platform, giving you the ability to true multi-window functionality, much like a desktop interface, and it just converts this tablet into more of a laptop/desktop experience. And in addition to that, you can also hook up a wireless display and use a Bluetooth keyboard and mice to really make this a potential desktop replacement device. Now moving forward, let's talk about the detachable keyboard attachments that's available on both platforms. Now I think the Magic Keyboard is probably the gold standard of detachable tablet keyboards. Apple has done a lot of work to make it as user-friendly and as ergonomically optimized as possible, and it really does show. The keyboard feels very nicely laid out. There's decent amount of key travel, tactile feedback, and the trackpad itself is just as good as what you would find with their latest generation MacBooks or MacBook Pros. Now we're using the slim keyboard attachment on the Samsung side, which has a pretty good layout, good key spacing, but unfortunately that the spring rate on the keys themselves and the travel distance is greatly reduced, so you don't have the same kind of tactile responsiveness as what we encounter with the Magic Keyboard. In addition to that, it feels a little bit plasticky and the build isn't to the same level as what we encounter with the Apple product, even though it's around the same price. So I would actually recommend getting a third-party keyboard attachment for the Samsung. We're using this one from Dexnor, which is a Bluetooth keyboard. It has a built-in battery, and it's about a third of the price of the keyboard attachment with the trackpad at only $110 on Amazon. Granted, the build quality is pretty cheap, much like the Samsung products, but at least you're not paying that much for it. And since it is Bluetooth, you can actually use it detached from the tablet itself, making it great if you want to use Dex on an external display. Plus, it has an RGB backlight, something that the factory keyboard does not have. Now let's talk about the stylus. Now on the Apple side, you actually have two options these days, either the USB-C Apple Pencil or the Pencil Pro. The USB-C is the cheaper option. It charges through the USB-C connection, not wirelessly like the Pro version, and it just has basic writing functionality as well as hover support. It's a great utilitarian stylus for the iPad, so great for taking notes or doing simple drawings and doodles. The Pencil Pro, on the other hand, is about $130, but it has a lot more tech built inside. So it has sensors for squeeze, tilt, haptic feedback, as well as double tap and gyroscopic capabilities. So it's really optimized for artists or anybody that need to have precise controls over their stylus. Now on the Samsung side, the S Pen gets included with the purchase of the tablet, which is nice to see. And for more or less, it has the same basic functionality as the Apple Pencil, with some of the functionality of even the Apple Pencil Pro. So it has gyroscopic capabilities. We can tilt the action to get different brush strokes and things like that. But it's great for a basic utilitarian basis. If you want to just take some handwritten notes, do some of the AI functionality with the S Pen, in addition to just doodling around or creating digital art. Now, in terms of the cameras themselves, starting at the back, we have a 12 megapixel wide camera on the iPad. You also have a LiDAR scanner, and you have the ability to shoot 4K at 60 FPS. Now, on the Samsung, on the rear side, you actually have dual cameras, a 13 megapixel and an 8 megapixel ultra wide, and you can record 4K at 30 frames per second. I personally don't think that you really need two cameras at the back. That's why Apple has gotten rid of that. But if you need the ultra wide, there is that secondary camera. But in terms of the quality level on the rear facing cameras, they're both fairly close, but I think from a low light perspective, the iPad and iPhones in general are really great, especially for video quality. You're just going to find better low light performance and clarity and sharpness in video mode specifically, but the stills are fairly comparable on both cameras at the back. Now what you're looking at is the front-facing camera on the iPad Pro, and it actually is zoomed in to the actual image sensor, which actually looks like this. So it's ultra wide, and it basically zooms and crops in and tracks your face when you're in a video call or using FaceTime. But this is the overall quality of the front-facing camera. Now this is the front-facing camera on the Samsung Galaxy Tab S10 Ultra. It actually has two cameras. One is a medium focal range, which is what we're using right now, but you also have a dedicated camera for a wide angle field of view for multiple people. And this doesn't zoom in or crop in as much since there are those two cameras, but is the video quality and the audio quality better than the iPad Pro? Now moving forward, let's talk about the internal specs on both of these in terms of processing capabilities. Now obviously we're using the M4 chip on the iPad Pro, which is one of the most powerful mobile processors that you can get on any laptop or tablet. Now, since we have the poor man's version of the iPad Pro, which is the baseline configuration, we have the 9-core CPU, 10-core GPU, 16-core neural engine, 256 gigabytes of long-term storage, and 8 gigabytes of RAM. But you can obviously option up to the 10-core CPU version with up to 2 terabytes of long-term storage with 16 gigabytes of RAM. Now, the Samsung Galaxy Tab S10 Ultra is utilizing a Dimensity 9300 SoC from MediaTek. It's a 4 nanometer octa-core processor with a G720 MC12 GPU. It's fairly powerful for what it is, even though MediaTek is typically more budget oriented. But we'll see how this performs in terms of machine learning on our benchmark results. But in terms of the memory configuration, you do get 12 gigabytes of RAM even on the baseline configuration with 256 gigabytes of long-term storage. If you need more, you can get up to 1 terabyte and 16 gigabytes of RAM. Now, in order to test the performance of these two, we're going to take a look at some synthetic benchmarks. First, we're going to take a look at the new Geekbench AI benchmarking suite, which is going to measure the precision of the machine learning systems in both of these two platforms. It's going to give us 3 individual scores, one for single point precision, that is a 32-bit data set, one is half precision, a 16-bit data set, and quantized score, which is 8-bit. Now, what that means is how large the data set is and how accurate those results are. The higher the number on each score, the better it is. Now, the results on the iPad Pro with the M4 chip is more than double on both the single and half precision scores. And on the quantized scores, you're looking at about 1.6 times the performance on the M4. So that pretty much means in terms of the ML capabilities, you are looking at a much more advanced system, almost twice the performance. So that means the reliability and the accuracy of machine learning capabilities on the M4 chip is twice as good as the MediaTek processor found on the S10 Ultra. Now, in terms of testing out the conventional CPU performance utilizing Geekbench again, the multi-core and single-core performance is much greater on the M4 as you would expect. We're getting about 3,600 points and about 12,000 points on single and multi-core score on the M4 respectively, versus about 2,100 and 7,200 on the Samsung side. Now, moving forward and taking a look at Antutu, which measures both the CPU GPU performance, we're getting around 2.6 million points on the M4 iPad versus about 2 million points on the Samsung side. Lastly, to isolate the GPU even further, we're going to use 3D Mark's Wildlife in extreme setting, and we're getting an average frame rate of 48.7 FPS on the M4 on the iPad Pro versus about 30.4 average frames per second on the S10 Ultra. Now, in terms of comparing the AI systems, I do have to preface that Apple Intelligence isn't officially out. We've been testing out the beta version 18.1 to make this video, but hopefully down the road Apple Intelligence will finally come out. But as of this date, mid-October, it's still not out yet. But basically, from a fundamental standpoint, both AI systems will give you similar capabilities. One has to do with language enhancements, so proofreading your text, whether it be translating it to another language, rewriting it in different styles, whether it's more professional, friendly, or concise. You can summarize long emails and text messages in addition to web pages to make the information more digestible and to make you more efficient in terms of taking in a lot of text information. You obviously have creation tools if you want to generate AI art, emojis, or doodle your drawings and make them into a more realistic or more creative versions of your original inputs. In addition to that, you have a content-aware fill or generative fill that you find in Photoshop in your photos. So if you want to circle a specific item that you want to erase, you can erase it and it'll generate an artificial background behind that item to match your original scene. This works more or less the same on both platforms. Really, the fundamental difference between Apple Intelligence and Samsung AI is because Apple controls much of the hardware and software and the ecosystem is much more unified, you are getting more data set for the AI to kind of know things more about you. That means things like notifications are going to be more personalized and more prioritized to your specific day-to-day needs. And in addition to that, you're going to have access to your emails and messages in a better integrated fashion. So you can ask Siri specifically about your emails, unlike the Samsung side, which utilizes Gmail and other third-party applications, which right now doesn't have a unified AI platform that communicates with one another. And the new Bixby in general is a slightly more polished version of the old Bixby. It definitely sounds better, more human-like, but in terms of most of its functionality is very similar to the old version, where you can't really have a contextual conversation with it. It doesn't listen to you as long, and it can't really move with you on the fly like what Siri can do with its new enhancements, which are a lot more human-like, and because it has access to native apps such as emails and messages, it's a lot more personalized and more helpful as a virtual assistant. Now lastly, let's talk about the battery capacity and overall performance of both these two tablets. Now the iPad Pro 13-inch version has a 38.9 watt-hour lithium polymer battery. On the Android side, we're looking at 43.45 watt-hour battery, so slightly larger battery on the Android, but it is a larger display, which is going to be more power hungry. Samsung claims about 16 hours of video playback time, and Apple claims about 10 hours of video playback time. So we're going to actually put that through the test, and we're going to do our own video playback tests, playing the same video on both platforms in airplane mode with their native video player to get the most battery efficiency out of them. And we're simply going to run them from 100% down to when they pretty much die and can't play a video. And the total runtime was about 14 hours, 37 minutes on the iPad Pro versus 12 hours and 52 minutes on the Samsung S10 Ultra. Now what I want to do is talk about the unique advantage that each tablet presents. Let's first talk about the Tab S10 Ultra from Samsung. I think from a content consumption device, it is definitely the superior device. With the 16:10 aspect ratio, larger overall displays with thinner bezels, it's just better to watch video content, especially in 16:9 aspect ratio. You just don't have the same level of bars top to bottom that you'll find with the 4:3 aspect ratio on the iPad. I also like the fact that Samsung includes the S Pen with the purchase of the Ultra. You don't have to pay another $80 to $130 like you do with the Apple Pencil or Pencil Pro on the Apple side, in addition to the fact that I also like the feel of the S Pen in the hand. It's ergonomically friendly with a flat surface on one side, and the tip itself is rubberized, so it gives you a nice resistance when you're using the thing on the display itself, versus the Apple Pencil ergonomically is personally not my favorite. And although many artists have made incredible works of art with it, I think they're just used to that ergonomic, but for me personally, I actually prefer using the S Pen over the Apple Pencil. Furthermore, I like the fact that the Samsung is more or less feature complete with the AI suite of capabilities at the time of launch. Unlike what Apple Intelligence is doing, where it's still in beta mode right now for most devices as of mid-October 2024. Additionally, just like the classic Samsung devices, you have a microSD expansion slot, which is very convenient for expanding your internal storage and giving you that extra convenience factor, which you don't have obviously with the iPad. Furthermore, I'm a big fan of the Samsung Dex interface. Not only do you get a desktop-like experience with floating multi-window functionality, great for productivity, but if you want to hook it up to a display, you can do that wirelessly or wired, making this a pretty compelling desktop/laptop replacement device. Now moving forward, let's talk about the unique advantages that the M4 iPad Pro presents. Firstly, it is thinner and lighter than the Samsung tablet, making it a little bit more friendly for traveling purposes or fitting into smaller backpacks. Secondly, even though the 4:3 aspect ratio isn't great for content consumption, it is pretty good for content creation. Whether you're writing something on word processing document or working on a video or photo editing, with that more square-ish display, you get more vertical real estate, which is great for timeline, as well as different taskbars depending upon what application you're using. And just generally from a productivity standpoint, 4:3 is sometimes more convenient than an ultra-wide 16:9 or 16:10 aspect ratio. On top of that, coupled with the smaller screen size, but yet still very high resolution OLED display, we have a slightly higher PPI count, resulting in images and videos looking a little bit sharper than what we encounter with the Samsung display, in addition to the fact that the color accuracy and reference mode is a little bit more color accurate. Again, better for people that are doing color grading or photo editing or creating content that needs to be more accurate to reality. We obviously have to mention that the M4 chip is the most powerful mobile processor on the market right now, making the iPad Pro probably the fastest tablet in the world. In most of our synthetic benchmark results, we're getting up to 2 to 3 times the performance of the Samsung MediaTek processor. So if you're going to be doing any kind of 4K video rendering or anything like that, expect to see at least twice the performance on the iPad Pro. In addition to that, we also have USB 4 versus USB 3 on the Samsung. So on the iPad Pro, if you're going to be transferring data back and forth between a fast external SSD that has USB 4 compliance, you are going to see much faster transfer speeds and a greater throughput. Furthermore, from a keyboard and trackpad perspective, I think the quality level on the Magic Keyboard is heads and shoulders beyond what the factory Samsung keyboard provides. And in fact, in most cases, I'd probably recommend, as we showed you in the video, to go with an aftermarket brand just to save the money. If you're going to be using this as a laptop replacement device, doing a lot of typing, using that trackpad, the Magic Keyboard is expensive, but it is kind of worth the money. Additionally, when it comes to battery life, on average, we did encounter, both from our everyday usability standpoint and our video playback test, that we're getting at least an hour to 2 more battery life out of the iPad Pro compared to the S10 Ultra. And lastly, when it comes to the AI features, even though Apple Intelligence isn't out yet, but based on my testing so far in the beta version, I think it's definitely a little bit more capable. Since Apple marries hardware and software together, the artificial intelligence system just knows so much more information about you, whether it's through the email integration, messages, photos, or through its better Siri voice integration, which is a little bit more smarter, more contextual, and just feels a little bit more human-like, getting you closer to that virtual assistant that we all want from AI. Now, in summary, if I had to pick between the iPad Pro and the S10 Ultra, and purely from a value perspective, you're just looking at it from the hardware side, there's no doubt that the M4 chip is worth kind of every penny. It's incredibly powerful and almost wasted on this tablet running the iPad OS. If you were to use an M4 chip powered by a full operating system, whether it be a Mac OS X or anything else, it'd be incredibly capable. And even though the ecosystem on the app library and overall Pro apps are becoming more and more ubiquitous on the iOS/iPad OS platform, it's still pretty limited compared to a full-on MacBook, but certainly exceptional value and probably one of the best displays that you can get on any consumer electronic device. So even though the Samsung Tab is pretty competitively priced, I think from a long-term perspective, the iPad Pro is going to completely wipe the floor in pretty much all regards, besides a few caveats here and there. So in most cases, I'd probably go with the iPad Pro, and I would recommend most people to do the same, even if they're agnostic to whichever Apple ecosystem or Windows platform they use. It's just the better consumer device. But besides those notions, that's really it. I definitely have to know what you guys think of both the Samsung Galaxy S10 Ultra tablet and the iPad Pro, which one you guys would specifically pick. Now in the next video, what we're going to do is a three-way comparison between these two tablets and the Microsoft Surface Pro 11. So definitely check out the channel for that video, or in the description if that's out. If you haven't done so already, please make sure to give us a thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't. Have post notifications turned on, and I want to thank you guys so much for watching. We'll see you later. Take care.